Commander Zane Helios had led countless expeditions into the shadowed reaches of space, where stars dimmed to pinpricks, swallowed by the nothingness that stretched endlessly. Yet, as the Erebus made its descent toward Olaris VII, a desolate, forgotten planet at the edge of the Andromeda cluster, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's icy surface. Olaris VII had come to the Empire's attention only recently. An unmanned probe passing through the sector had intercepted faint signals, a pattern almost like language embedded within the natural frequencies of the planet. The Empire had immediately sensed the potential, ancient knowledge or technology that could offer them an edge. Their orders to Helios had been absolute: retrieve whatever was buried there, dead or alive, and return with anything that could be of use to the Empire's ever-expanding reign. When the ship's landing struts groaned and hissed against the frozen surface, a fine cloud of dust drifted up, clinging to the sides of the ship like ash. Helios could feel it in his bones, the weight of something waiting just beneath them, old and patient, a secret that had endured millennia. The crew descended onto the planet's surface, their footfalls muffled in the soft, ash-like soil. The planet was bleak, with skies an ashen gray, and the horizon was marred by jagged mountain ridges like the teeth of some immense, slumbering beast. The light was weak, giving the impression of perpetual dusk, as though the sun had abandoned Olaris VII long ago. Their equipment began to pick up the signal immediately, a faint, pulsing energy emanating from a point several miles to the north. They trudged on, an eerie silence enveloping them. It was Dr. Marissa Voss, the team's xenolinguist, who first noticed the strange shapes underfoot. She halted, knelt down, and ran her gloved fingers over the ground, brushing away layers of dust. These are carvings," she whispered, almost to herself. "Symbols, maybe. No, blueprints." Helios ordered the rest of the crew to assist her in clearing away the ash. Beneath it, they found themselves standing on the edge of a massive, sprawling map carved into the planet's very crust. The patterns stretched out in all directions, twisting and overlapping in impossible formations that defied geometry and logic. Helios's stomach churned as he looked at it. The shapes seemed to shift in his peripheral vision, as if they were alive, watching. The team spread out, and slowly, details began to emerge, symbols that defied translation, alien markings carved with precision that hinted at a civilization more advanced than anything known to humanity. Helios tried to shake the feeling that he was standing atop something not meant to be uncovered, that the very act of brushing off the dust was a violation of something ancient and unspeakable. "Sir, it's strange," whispered Voss, her face pale and drawn. "These symbols, they're patterns, yet not. It's like they're embedded with something deeper, something that looks back." Helios didn't want to admit he felt it too, the creeping sensation of being watched. But they couldn't afford to turn back now. They began to take scans, recording the markings as meticulously as they could, though the alien geometry seemed to resist being captured. The holograms and scans flickered, distorting as though the blueprints themselves refused to be contained within the technology. As they worked, whispers started to drift through the team's headsets, faint and unintelligible, like voices speaking from just beyond the threshold of hearing. Some crew members glanced around, checking their equipment, while others merely shivered, brushing it off as interference or stray signals. Yet, the whispers persisted, becoming clearer and more insistent. "Your eyes are closed," one whisper murmured, "but we are awake." Helios shook his head, focusing on his scans, but he could feel the sweat prickle at the base of his spine, despite the frigid atmosphere. His eyes kept darting back to the carvings, the impossible patterns. They seemed to twist, to turn inward on themselves in ways that made his head throb. It was then that he realized they weren't just looking at a map. They were looking at something alive, something that waited beneath the surface of the planet, coiled and patient. As the hours dragged on, unease seeped into the team like a sickness. Small, strange details began to nag at them. Shapes carved within shapes, recursive spirals that never truly ended, glyphs that hinted at a language but never quite formed. No matter how much data they gathered, the blueprints remained a mystery, each answer bringing only more questions. One by one, the crew began to report incidents, strange dreams, images that flashed across the backs of their eyelids even when they were wide awake. Shadows that seemed to creep along the horizon, bending and warping without cause. When he questioned them, they described the same thing. A massive, formless shadow stretching across the stars, consuming entire galaxies in silence. It was only a nightmare, they'd say, but their haunted expressions told him otherwise. By the time they returned to the Erebus, the unease had turned to dread. They had uncovered the blueprints, but they could not leave the images behind. They were etched into the minds of each crew member, as indelible as if they'd been carved into their skin. Helios could feel it too, the nagging sense that something had taken root inside them, something cold and foreign. As the ship's engines hummed to life and the Erebus began to lift off, Helios cast one last glance at Olaris VII. The blueprints seemed to pulse, alive and breathing, as if they'd left something vital behind. It was then he realized with a sick certainty that they hadn't simply taken something from the planet. They had been claimed by it. Back aboard the Erebus, the crew returned to the blueprints, driven by a shared, unspoken compulsion. The carvings had made a mark on them, an itch buried deep within that only study could scratch. For Dr. Marissa Voss, the obsession ran deepest. She pored over the scans, eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot, her fingers trembling with excitement, and something darker, something tainted. She had barely slept since they'd lifted off from Olaris VII, and when she did, her sleep was plagued by visions. The patterns had begun to speak to her. They whispered, murmuring secrets she felt compelled to uncover, even though each truth seemed to scrape away at her sanity. Yet, beneath the fear, a feverish determination bloomed, urging her onward as if guided by an unseen hand. Her first breakthrough came in the dead hours of ship's night. The rest of the crew had grown accustomed to her murmurs, the soft tapping of her fingers as she traced the symbols on her screen. But tonight was different. When the code finally cracked, a wave of nausea hit her, a feeling of dread so intense she nearly blacked out. The translation wasn't text, wasn't language in any conventional sense. It was something far worse. A layered message designed to bypass cognition and sink directly into her mind. She whispered the translation aloud, unable to contain herself. Her voice, strained and hollow, echoed through the lab. "We are the architects of your nightmare. We have watched, we have waited, and now you will fulfill the design we left for you." It was only the beginning. As she delved deeper, the symbols and shapes seemed to unravel and reform, bending and twisting, becoming something she could understand yet not explain. A sense of raw intelligence bled from the glyphs, like tendrils winding through her mind, grafting the knowledge into her thoughts. It was as if the language itself was alive, rewriting her piece by piece. Days blurred into a fever dream. She'd forgotten to eat, barely drank, her hands ink-stained and raw from scratching alien symbols onto the walls of her quarters. Helios, seeing the signs of strain, tried to intervene. "Marissa," he said, his voice low and cautious, "you need to step away. Whatever those symbols are doing to you, it isn't worth it." She looked up, her eyes empty, glassy, as though staring at something far beyond him. She spoke in a slow, deliberate monotone, a voice not her own. "They're not just symbols, Commander. They're instructions. They're waiting for us to understand. I can almost see it, see what they want." The rest of the crew began to suffer in kind. Headaches blossomed into migraines, and quiet whispers turned to full-throated voices that echoed in the void. A static-filled chorus taunting them, urging them on. Each member of the crew became gripped by an eerie fixation, sketching fragments of the blueprint, unable to stop themselves. When they closed their eyes, they saw the patterns, vivid and throbbing, like symbols burned directly onto their minds. The shapes, the spirals, the endless interlocking glyphs. They had become part of them, and no amount of focus or willpower could remove them. Helios fought to keep his grip, yet even he wasn't spared. His dreams took on new dimensions, dark and endless landscapes, stretching beneath a sky that pulsated with alien light. Sometimes, in the depth of sleep, he could feel himself walking those dreamlands, drawn to an unseeable shape beyond the horizon. And every time he would wake with the same phrase ringing in his mind, words that chilled him to his core. "We have guided you here, and you will awaken us." Reality began to erode. The walls of the ship, once solid and safe, seemed to pulse and breathe, shadows lurking in every corner. In the silence of the corridors, faint echoes would bounce back, strange sounds like footsteps or whispers not of this world. The crew's mental state frayed further. Marissa was the worst. She'd stopped speaking entirely, her gaze hollow and distant, as though she'd glimpsed something no human should ever see. One evening, Helios found her hunched over her console, surrounded by cryptic symbols she had scrawled in blood on the walls. He recoiled, the horror gripping him, but something in her voice froze him in place when she spoke. "We're unlocking something, Zane," she murmured, her tone somewhere between a plea and an accusation. "These aren't just instruction, they're keys. The symbols, they're alive. They want something from us. We're the final pieces. Don't you feel it, Commander? That pull?" He did feel it. A sick, compelling urge that crept through him with every heartbeat. A part of him recognized that these blueprints, these alien instructions, had been planted millennia before humans had even risen from their primordial origins, as if waiting for someone, for them, to complete a cycle as old as the stars. As Marissa slipped into the shadows of her mind, the other crew members followed, each haunted by visions and shapes they could no longer escape. Commander Helios could no longer deny the terrible truth. The blueprints had begun to consume them, to mold them like clay into vessels for something unspeakable, an intelligence whose nature was not meant for human understanding. Each day he could feel it rooting deeper, like fingers wrapping around his brain. In the quiet hours, he would hear his own voice repeating phrases he had never learned, the words cold and otherworldly, summoning something from beyond the stars. We come to awaken." It wasn't long before the first death occurred. Crewman Adler had been found curled up in his quarters, mouth open in a silent scream, his hands twisted into clawed positions as though he had tried to scratch something unseen out of the air around him. No cause of death could be found. His heart had simply stopped, yet the look in his dead eyes suggested that he had seen something that had stared back from the abyss. They tried to carry on, tried to ignore the growing madness gnawing at their minds, but each day another crew member fell. One by one, they succumbed to visions, to the whispers that grew louder, more insistent, filling every corner of the ship. Helios began to realize the horrific reality of their situation. The blueprints weren't merely instructions. They were a virus, a kind of interstellar infection, seeding itself in their minds, rewriting them, making them into something unrecognizable. And still, he couldn't stop. The drive to continue, to decode, to fulfill whatever twisted purpose the blueprints held for them was too strong, overriding fear and reason. It was as if their bodies were merely tools, empty shells carrying out instructions laid out eons ago with a precision that terrified him. It was on the last night of their sanity that Marissa left him a final message, scrawled in dark crimson across the bulkhead outside her quarters. In shaky letters she had written, "We are the hands of the architects. We have built the key. And now, we open the door." When Helios found her, she was slumped over her console, her lifeless eyes wide open, staring into something that no longer needed understanding. The last of his hope flickered out then, like a distant star swallowed by the darkness. The encrypted message arrived in the dark stillness of the Erebus's command deck, a pulse of coded light that Helios didn't see at first, too consumed by the haze of exhaustion and creeping dread that had settled over him like a heavy fog. When he finally opened it, his fingers trembled. He braced himself, a dull, lingering hope that perhaps the Empire would order them to destroy the blueprints, to abandon Olaris VII, to run. But as he read, dread twisted into something else, something colder, sharper, and anger edged with despair. The Empire had known. They had known about the blueprint's potential to infect, to unhinge the human mind. They had suspected the alien intelligence lurking within them, understood it far better than Helios or his team could have comprehended. And they had chosen to proceed, viewing the Erebus and its crew as expendable tools in their relentless quest for dominion over the galaxy. Helios reread the message, his mind numb. Commander Helios, initiate Phase 2 of Operation Abyssal Reach. Assemble and activate the device per the blueprints. The power source will initiate the sequence. Compliance is imperative. The words felt like a death sentence, not just for him, but for his entire crew, for the Erebus itself. His fingers curled around the tablet, nearly crushing it. He wanted to scream, to cast it across the room, to resist the inhuman commands that had turned them into puppets. But he knew it was useless. The Empire's demands were absolute, and every ounce of his training told him he had no choice but to obey. Slowly, mechanically, Helios summoned the remaining members of his team. Their faces were drawn, eyes hollow, as if they, too, were suspended in the grip of some ancient directive they couldn't comprehend. The madness had left its mark on each of them, Their bodies moved with a robotic precision, their faces frozen in expressions of silent terror. As Helios laid out the orders, the finality of the task sunk into them all. Marissa Voss's last message on the bulkhead, written in her own blood, seemed to haunt the air itself, whispering to each of them, "We are the hands of the architects. We have built the key. And now, we open the door." It was Dr. Kellum who spoke first, his voice brittle, barely a whisper. "Commander, if we do this, if we activate whatever this thing is, we have no idea what we're unleashing. Those symbols, those blueprints, they aren't just instructions. They're something alive. They want something from us." But Helios felt the compulsion as an itch in his mind, a dark thread twisting tighter, pulling him toward a conclusion he was powerless to resist. His voice felt distant, a mere echo of himself as he replied, "The Empire's orders are clear. We complete the blueprint. We assemble the device." The crew assembled the components in silence, each piece of alien metal clicking into place with a terrible finality. Their hands moved in sync, each action feeling rehearsed, as if something deep in their minds remembered this process from a time long before their birth, a ritual embedded in the human psyche. They worked without words, without hesitation, possessed by the same sinister calm. The blueprints had settled in them all, laying claim to their bodies and minds, commanding obedience as coldly and precisely as the Empire's orders. As the final component slid into place, the device activated with a sound that seemed to vibrate the very atoms of the Erebus. A low hum, like the thrumming of a monstrous heartbeat, pulsed through the ship's walls. The lights dimmed, flickering with a sickly green glow, and an unearthly energy rippled outward, wrapping around the ship and twisting space itself into strange, unnatural angles. The crew stumbled back, eyes wide, their mouths twisted into silent screams. In the center of the room, the device flared to life, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move of their own accord, writhing and twisting in ways that defied physics, like something sentient, probing the boundaries of reality. The first wave of voices hit them like a tidal force, a chorus of sounds that clawed at their minds. They were ancient, ageless, a cacophony of words and cries not meant for human ears. Helios clutched his head, sinking to his knees as he fought to keep his sanity. He could feel it then, the consciousness, the vast, formless intelligence that had crafted the blueprints eons ago. And now, after untold ages, it had found its emissaries. They were not builders, but heralds, bearers of a darkness that had been waiting patiently in the void. He tried to scream, to order his crew to run, but his voice failed. His own body no longer obeyed him. The device demanded blood, demanded sacrifice, and Helios felt a sickening understanding settle over him. They weren't activating a mere machine. They were awakening something vast, something ancient, something that had waited for eons to breach the walls of reality. One by one, the crew began to collapse, twitching and writhing as if something invisible crawled over them, inside them. Some clawed at their own skin. Others whispered to unseen entities, their words dissolving into mad laughter or screams. Helios watched, paralyzed, as the device completed its final phase, and in that moment, he saw it, a rift. A vast, yawning chasm of darkness opening in the very fabric of space, revealing a glimpse of something so hideous, so unnatural that his mind recoiled in horror. It was a shape, or the shadow of a shape, a formless mass that seemed to defy all concepts of existence. It writhed, flickering in and out of sight, a thing made not of matter but of pure void, a sentience that saw them as less than insects, as nothing but tools in an ancient scheme. Then the rift expanded, and Helios knew with a sick certainty that it was not merely a portal. It was an invitation, a breach that would tear open the walls of their reality, allowing the darkness to pour forth and consume everything they had ever known. The last shreds of his will faltered. He saw the price of their obedience, the Empire's insatiable lust for power, the hubris that had doomed them all. The blueprints had always been a trap, a snare set by a power beyond comprehension, beyond galaxies. Humanity was nothing but a speck of dust, an ignorant pawn in a game played on a scale his mind could scarcely fathom. As the rift grew wider, he felt the shadows begin to seep through, reaching out with tendrils of freezing, unnatural darkness. The ship's walls buckled, and he could hear the structure of the Erebus groaning, surrendering under the weight of an alien presence that should never have been awakened. Helios felt his thoughts begin to scatter, his mind fraying as the dark intelligence flooded into him, filling his mind with visions of galaxies collapsing, of planets consumed in silence, of endless night stretching out across eternity. As the tendrils of darkness coiled around him, the last thought that drifted through his mind was not of escape, not of survival. It was a bitter realization. They had never stood a chance. From the moment they had touched down on Olaris VII, they had belonged to the darkness, to the architects who had written their fates eons ago. And now, with the Empire's orders fulfilled, there was nothing left for them but the black, endless void. The device hummed one last time, its purpose complete, as Helios and his crew were swallowed by the dark, their bodies merging with the shadows, their minds extinguished, leaving nothing but silence in the cold, indifferent reaches of space. The device's hum deepened, a resonance that seeped through every corner of the Erebus, like a malignant heartbeat. Commander Zane Helios, standing at the ship's trembling core, could feel the weight of it pressing against his chest, robbing him of breath. Each thrum seemed to suck the warmth and light from the room, leaving only a frigid, consuming darkness that spread like ink in water. The gateway yawned open, vast and silent, a wound in the fabric of reality itself. Through it, the crew glimpsed something that defied description. A vast, shifting darkness, flecked with distant, unfamiliar stars, like galaxies dissolving in a cosmic river of shadows. It was not simply emptiness. It was a living, sentient void, hungry and ancient. Helios felt a primal terror awaken in his chest, a terror that knew no reason, no comfort, only instinct. This was a darkness beyond understanding, a force that existed outside of time, driven by a purpose that humanity could never grasp. One by one, the remaining crew members were drawn forward, helplessly transfixed. They had become hollow shells, vessels stripped of will and purpose, held upright only by the malevolent energy of the gateway itself. Helios's eyes locked onto the void, and he saw the shadows shift and swell, like a colossal eye opening, fixing its gaze upon them. It saw them. It knew them. The first to fall was Dr. Kellum. The moment his hand brushed the edge of the gateway, his body convulsed, mouth stretching into a rictus of silent horror. His form twisted, skin bubbling and splitting as though something inside him fought to tear free. He crumpled, his last agonized scream swallowed by the void as his body was absorbed, leaving behind nothing but a wisp of shadow that dissipated into the cold air. Helios staggered back, bile rising in his throat as he watched Kellum vanish, his existence erased as if he had never been. The other crew members followed, one by one, each caught in the inexorable pull of the gateway. They didn't resist. They had no energy left for resistance. Whatever glimmer of self-preservation they might have once possessed had been drained by the blueprints, by the device, by the voice that whispered endlessly in their minds. In his final moments of lucidity, Helios realized the gateway wasn't a portal, it was a maw, a cosmic throat devouring all that came within reach. He could feel it now, the intelligence that lay beyond, a consciousness so vast it encompassed whole galaxies, a being that existed outside the bounds of any natural law, any physical reality. The blueprints had been its lure, and they, foolish and blind, had opened the door. And now the darkness would flow out, spilling like an endless tide into their universe, a force that neither the Empire nor any of humanity's power could contain. Yet, even in his horror, Helios felt the pull of obedience. The blueprints had woven themselves into his mind, wrapping around his thoughts like a noose, forcing him to step forward, toward the darkness, toward his own annihilation. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the inevitable, but in that last instant, a vision bloomed in his mind. He saw Earth, his home, and every other planet of the Empire's reach, their lights flickering out one by one, each world swallowed by an advancing tide of black. He saw civilizations crushed, their histories erased, their existence nothing more than a brief passing thought in the mind of the entity now crossing into their reality. As his mind buckled under the strain, he fell into that vision, watching helplessly as stars died, their light extinguished by the encroaching dark. He saw fleets crumble, entire planets devoured in silence, and humanity's final cries absorbed into an endless night that stretched on into eternity. The last flickers of Helios's consciousness clung to that vision, and in his final moments he understood the truth. They hadn't been explorers or builders or even pawns. They had been the sacrifice, the unwitting heralds of something older than time itself, a force that had waited patiently for eons for someone foolish enough to open the door. It was the ultimate cruelty, a plan seeded millennia ago, patiently designed and flawlessly executed. A scream tore from his throat, guttural and raw, yet it made no sound. The gateway had taken it, absorbed it along with his final breaths, his final thoughts. And then, as the darkness crept into his mind, Helios felt himself unravel, his consciousness dissolving, every memory, every thought stripped away and devoured by the void. And then, silence. The gateway flared once more, casting its sickly green glow across the empty ship, now devoid of life, of purpose, of anything that had once been human. Slowly, like a predator rising from the depths, the entity began to emerge. Its form shifted and changed, too vast for any one shape, an amorphous blot of shadow that spilled outward, coiling along the walls, filling the corridors with a darkness that pulsed like a second heartbeat. It flowed with unnatural grace, a silent tide expanding, spreading, seeping into every corner of the ship, hungering for more, for everything. The void had found its path, its passageway into a new universe, and with each moment it grew, feeding on the silence left behind by the crew's final breaths. Days later, a lone distress beacon from the Erebus reached the Empire's nearest relay station. The recording was garbled, the signal warped by unknown interference, but one word repeated over and over, chilling in its finality. Open, open, open. Within hours, a new fleet was dispatched to investigate the source of the beacon. The Empire, unaware of the doom waiting for them, saw only the opportunity they had long craved, a promise of power beyond anything they had ever known. They moved swiftly, an unstoppable force advancing on the last transmission of a doomed crew. But by the time they arrived, it was too late. The Erebus floated silently, adrift in the dark, its hull scorched and twisted as though something had hollowed it from within. As the fleet's lead vessel approached, its crew saw the gateway, still open, still pulsing, and beyond it, something shifting, waiting. The Empire's ships lingered for only a moment before the darkness lunged forward, engulfing them. One by one, the lights of the fleet blinked out, swallowed by the void, until nothing remained but silence, a silence that spread outward, unstoppable, implacable. And so the fall began. Planet by planet, the Empire crumbled, its worlds plunged into eternal night, each beacon silenced, each light snuffed out. Humanity's final age was not marked by war or rebellion, but by silence, a silence so deep that no memory of their existence remained, as if they had never been at all. And as the last star flickered and died, the entity moved on, slipping into the void to wait once more, patient, timeless, forever watching for the next civilization to reach out into the dark, eager and unknowing, to draw it forth once again. In the cold, dead expanse of space, the blueprints lingered, drifting as fragments through the void, waiting for new eyes to see.